times when we are solving a quadratic that we are unable to factor. And in those times, we need to have another method or another tool in our toolbox to be able to solve the quadratic. One of those tools is the quadratic formula. The standard form of a quadratic is ax squared plus bx plus c, and when it equals 0, we're able to use the a, b, and c and plug it into our formula, which is given here. X equals negative b plus or minus the square root of b squared minus 4ac all over 2a. We need to work on being able to set up the quadratic formula with the equations below. To do that, we'll identify our a, our b, and our c and plug them into the formula. When we look at the first equation, we are given that a is equal to 7, b is equal to 16, c is 4, and we plug those numbers into our quadratic formula. Now this is the skeleton outline of the quadratic formula with boxes in each of the locations that you would actually plug numbers into. All of the other things in this formula stay the same. So the parts that are printed are the parts that are same every single time, and the light gray boxes are the parts that we are allowed to change. So let's plug this in. Our b is 16. Now it does say negative b, so if this 16 was negative, that would mean that we would need to change this to positive b. And then we have b squared. And we always want to put our b term in parentheses before we square it. If it was a negative number and we didn't put it in parentheses, we would get an incorrect answer in our calculator. So be sure to always put that in parentheses before you square it. Then we have a, which is 7, and c, which is 4. And all of that is over 2 times a, 7 again. Now I have a little song that I use to kind of remind me what I'm doing when I'm writing this down. And I know that you're able to look at the formula because it's been given to you. However, this song can kind of help make sure that we're copying it over correctly. So the song goes a little something like this. It's to the tune of Pop Goes the Weasel. X equals negative b plus or minus the square root b squared minus 4ac all over 2a. So as I start to write this formula down, I'll sing that every single time just to make sure that I've got everything in the right place. Let's take a look at our next one. We have 3 for our a. And again, I'm only able to extract my a, b, and c because it's equal to 0 already. B in this case is negative 1, and C is negative 2. So when I go to plug it in, I'll do it with the song this time. We have X equals negative B. Now when I plug this negative in for my B, remember it becomes positive. Some people also sing it as X equals opposite of B plus or minus the square root of B squared minus 4AC all over 2A. Now the focus of these two problems was only to make sure that we are able to plug into it and not to actually solve. To solve, we are going to need to follow these 7 steps. You may want to pause the video so that you can see them and write them down. Let me zoom out a little bit. That way you can see all 7. And I would write those down maybe at the bottom of the page. And we're going to use these steps now to be able to solve. When I look at my first example, I see that it's already equal to 0, so I can go ahead and label my A, B, and C. Our A would be 1. Remember, A is always the number in front of the x squared term. B is 2. It's the number in front of the x term. And C is negative 99. It's always the number that doesn't have an x with it. So when I go to put it into the formula, it looks like this. X equals negative B plus or minus the square root B squared minus 4AC all over 2A. And we're going to use these steps that we have over on the side here to solve. So I'll list them over to the side so that we can follow along. Step 1, we've got done, plugged in A, B, and C into the formula. Step 2, we are going to square the B that's inside of my radical. So we're going to do this part right here. Everything else will get copied exactly as you see it. So 2 squared, and we can do that in our calculator, or we can do that in our head. Notice I'm just recopying what was left there. And the only 2 steps that you are allowed to do in the same step is step 2 and step 3 here. You're allowed to do exactly one thing on top and one thing on the bottom each time you write down a step. So we did one thing on top, squared the B, and we just did one thing on the bottom, multiplied our denominator. Now we need to multiply the negative 4 times A times C. So I'll highlight that because that's the part I'm going to do next. Notice all of my focus so far has been underneath that radical. That's because I'm following my order of operations, and I did my grouping symbols first. We have 2 sets of grouping symbols in here. It's more than just parentheses. We have a grouping symbol of the square root symbol, and we have a grouping symbol of a fraction bar. So in my calculator, I'm going to include the negative with the 4 times 1 times negative 99. And I get positive 396. We don't make that negative come down here because we included it in the number that I multiplied. And then the 2 will get copied from the previous step. After we've done our multiplying, it's time for us to add or subtract whatever's underneath the radical. So the 4 plus 396 is next. Giving us 400. Once we've added or subtracted, we can take our square root. So that whole part, we'll do the square root. And if you don't know the square root off the top of your head, you can check it on your calculator. All of the ones so far in our standard are going to have perfect squares underneath the radical. So negative 2 plus or minus 20. And notice when I wrote that 20 and I've taken the square root, I no longer write the square root symbol over it. That would be like adding 2 numbers together and keeping the plus sign. We've already performed the operation, so we don't need to write that operation anymore. Once you get to this part, we are going to do what I've referred to as split and solve. We're splitting up this plus or minus symbol into two separate equations. One of them will be -2 plus 20 over 2, and the other one will be -2 minus 20 over 2. So we have -2 plus 20 equals 18 over 2, and 18 divided by 2 is 9. -2 minus 20 is -22, divided by 2 is -11. So my solutions are x equals 9 and -11. Let's take a look at 1b. It already equals 0, so I'm able to list my A, B, and C. A is 2, because that's the number in front of my x squared term. And B is always the term that goes with the x. There isn't one listed here, so B in this case is 0, leaving C to be -8. So my formula, x equals -b plus or minus square root b squared minus 4ac all over 2a. Step 1 in solving is complete. Step 2 is to square the b inside of the square root. And remember, we're also allowed to do one step on the bottom, which is the 2 times 2. 0 squared is just 0. And 2 times 2 is 4. After we're multiplying on the denominator, we can multiply our -4 times a times c. So in my calculator, I'll have -4 times 2 times -8 gives me 64. And because that 64 is positive, it changes to 0 plus 64. Now we can add or subtract under the radical. So we'll do 0 plus our 64. And we'll take our square root of 64, which is 8. It's time to split and solve. So we'll split this off into two separate equations. We have x is equal to -0, which we do know is equal to just 0. And the top one will make +8, and the bottom one will make -8. So -0 plus 8 is still 8. And 8 over 4 is 2. -0 minus 8 is -8. And negative 8 divided by 4 is a negative 2. So x is equal to 2 comma negative 2. Example 2b. This time it's not equal to 0, so I'm going to need to do a little bit of work to get this to equal 0, meaning I'll need to subtract 5 from both sides, leaving 4x squared 2 plus 2x minus 30 equals 0. And we'll label A, B, and C. A is equal to 4, B is equal to 2, and C is equal to negative 30. Time to plug into our formula. X equals negative B plus or minus the square root B squared minus 4AC all over 2A. So we can square our B that's inside of the radical, and we get to do this step at the same time. Remember, that's the only time that you're able to do 2 steps. So when I do 2 squared in my calculator, I get 4 minus 4 times negative 30, and all over 2 times 4, which is 8. Then we're able to actually multiply our negative 4 times negative 30. So negative 4 times negative 30, and we get 480. We can add and subtract underneath our radical now. So we'll do 4 plus 480. And then we can take the square root. So the square root of 484 is 22. So when we take the square root, remember we don't write the square symbol anymore, square root symbol. And after taking the square root, we're able to split and solve. So we'll have negative 2 plus 22 over 8, and x is equal to negative 2 minus 22 over 8. Negative 2 plus 22 is 20. And 8 doesn't go into 20, so I'll need to reduce it by dividing the top and the bottom by 4 to give 5 halves. Then we have negative 2 minus 22, which is negative 24 over 8. And negative 24 divided by 8 is negative 3. So my solution is both 5 halves and negative 3. Last one. example 2b here. It doesn't equal 0 either, so I'm going to need to add 3 to both sides. A is equal to 3, B is equal to -10, and C is equal to 7. Time to do number 1. Plug in A, B, and C into the formula. X equals -b. It's already negative, which makes it a positive 10. Plus or minus the square root b squared minus 4ac. Make sure that your b is in parentheses before you square it. All over 2a. We can do the square first of our b, and we get to do the bottom as well. So x is equal to 10 plus or minus the square root of -10 squared, which is positive 100, minus 4 times 3 times 7, all over 2 times 3, which is 6. Then we can multiply our -4 times a times c inside of our radical, our square root. So 10 plus or minus, and this part is what I'm doing right here, -4 times 3 times 7. So 100 minus -4 times 3 times 7 gives me 84. -84. Here it is on the calculator. Ooh, I'm not sure if you can see that. There you go. Then we can add or subtract in this case under the radical. And x is equal to 10 plus or minus the square root of 16 over 6. Take that square root. So x is equal to 10 plus or minus 4 over 6. Split and solve. X equals 10 plus 4 over 6, and x equals 10 minus 4 over 6. 10 plus 4 is 14 over 6. That doesn't go in evenly, so I'll need to reduce by 2 on top and bottom. Do apologize for how tiny this might look. So we have 7 over 3. And then on the bottom, 10 minus 4 is 6. And 6 over 6 is equal to 1. So x is equal to 7/3 and 1.